You're listening to the Exceptional Girls podcast. I'm Julie Withrow, your host and mom to Maddie, my neurodiverse, twice exceptional teenage daughter. Figuring out Maddie's unique wiring has been a game changer for her and for our relationship, but it took almost 15 years, and that's just too long. I'm on a mission to shorten the learning curve for other families by increasing awareness of neurodiversity in females, who are all too often misdiagnosed, misunderstood, or missed entirely. Join me for expert interviews, candid conversations, and hopefully even an aha moment or two as we learn how to help our exceptional girls feel seen, supported, and celebrated. This is Season 1, Episode 3 of the Exceptional Girls podcast. In this episode, and in Episode 4, you get to meet my daughter Madeline, or Maddie as most people call her. You'll learn more about her and how she experiences being neurodivergent and female. It's really important to me that she be a part of this podcast because she's my inspiration, first and foremost. And she and I both believe that there's no better way to increase understanding of neurodiversity than to listen to the voices of actual neurodivergent folks like Maddie share their experiences in their own words. We also want to talk openly and honestly about our relationship, which, as you'll hear, was not always the way it is today. Mother-daughter dynamics are complicated to begin with, and I also made some pretty big mistakes, which Maddie is more than happy to point out. Honestly, I still don't have this parenting thing all figured out, but I am really proud of the relationship I've built with my one and only daughter. Listen in to hear her share about her experiences as a twice exceptional girl. Hi, Madeline.
Hello.
Madeline, can you introduce yourself to our listeners? Maybe tell them how old you are and about some of your specific neurodiverse characteristics.
Yeah, sure. I'm Madeline. I'm 15 years old. I have ADHD combined type, ASD, and general anxiety disorder, and I'm also gifted.
Wow, that's a lot.
It sure is.
So Madeline is what we would call twice exceptional, meaning that she has intellectual giftedness and high abilities when it comes to, certain intellectual things, but she also has learning challenges. So, Maddie, can you talk a little bit about how you might experience that, like at school, for example?
Yeah, kind of putting me on the spot here, but I think I can do that. So I guess one of the biggest things, and this affects me less now, but there was a time when it really affected me. I just completely space out when I'm uninterested in something. And this can even happen at home when I'm tying my shoes to get out the door. I just completely space on things. And I'm not even really aware that I'm doing it, but time seems to stand still and it's passing way faster than I think it is. And I'm just lost in my thoughts and I don't really perceive what's going on around me. In addition to that, sometimes in social situations, it can be hard for me to understand the other person and how the other person is feeling and how I'm supposed to respond to certain social cues or how I'm supposed to react to certain signifiers, cues, I guess, but emotional situations, how I have a hard time really understanding those with other people.
So when you're in a conversation with somebody who you've just met, is that particularly stressful for you, or how do you manage situations like that?
Situations with somebody I've just met are, and this is maybe it's come off as a little strange, but I find them the easiest because there's a set number, there's set boundaries and rules there. And the other person can typically lead, you can judge from how they are speaking to you, how you speak to them. It becomes more difficult the more comfortable you are with the person to gauge what level you're at.
So maybe when you first meet somebody, it's easier because there's sort of a back and forth that's pretty that's pretty typical, right? Like, is it pretty predictable how that's going to go?
Yeah, it's like basic greetings. Hello, hi, what's your name? My name is blank. Oh, my name is blank. How are you today? There's like a script that you can follow. It's mapped out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you don't have a script, then what happens?
Then somebody will say hi to me in the halls of school, and I just straight up won't respond to them because I don't know what's going on.
Well, so tell me a little bit more about that. What do you mean you don't know what's going on?
So, like, when I am put in a social situation that is unexpected or that I haven't been able to prepare myself for, then I just kind of like space on what's going on. Like, I can't really react in time. It takes me a minute to process what's going on. So again, like if someone just says like hi to me, it's going to take like in the halls or in passing, it's going to take me a second to be like, oh, hi. Like the response is immediate. I'm like, wait, what? Someone's talking to me. Are they talking to me? What did they say? What do I say back?
Right. That makes sense to me. And I think I experienced that a little bit too, particularly like when you're caught off guard by somebody speaking to you. Do you find that?
Oh, yeah.
And if it's a really quick exchange, like if you're walking down the street and you're kind of in your own mind and you turn the corner and you see someone and they say hi and you're kind of like, huh? What?
Yeah, you're like, what?
Yeah.
To me, it happens a lot when people like say thank you. I'm just kind of like, yeah. Wait, you're welcome.
So I think that well, do you think that's part of autism, or do you, I think in my understanding that's kind of an autistic trait. Is that how you?
It is. It's to me, it's both an autistic trait and it's also like amplified by my anxiety, which makes it like especially hard for me to be present in social situations.
Okay.
And also my ADHD to some degree there too.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about giftedness. When you're in school, how do you think giftedness is both a strength and a challenge?
Well, when I'm in school, it's a strength because there's certain, like, if there's something I'm really interested in, I can really, really excel at it and I can get super in depth on it. And if I'm doing like a project or something, which I typically do in project-based learning, then I know I can produce a well-polished, finished, like engaging project because I was engaged. But the flip side of that is that if I'm not engaged, then my ADHD will spike up and I just space. Like I cannot pay attention to something that doesn't captivate me in some way. And there are ways, that you can sort of like cope with this, like connecting the subject to something that you are really interested in. But there are certain topics or certain projects where it's just like, you lost me the second you started talking.
And what about like if you've already learned something and they keep talking about it in class?
Yeah. There was one instance that I remember very vividly because it happened multiple times in second grade where we needed to read these books. And they were picture books, maybe about 30 pages long, typical picture book. And basically, like we had to read these maybe every single day in that class for like a week or 2 weeks. And by the end of it, I just could not stand like even looking at the cover because it was like, we've already read this. Why do we keep doing this? Like, what's the point if we should have been done a while ago?
So is it also hard to pay attention then when the work feels repetitive?
Absolutely. And to some degree, if the work is repetitive, but it kind of builds onto itself, then it can be like, oh, okay, this is all right. Like we're building, we're getting further. But if it's repetitive and mundane and you're not introducing anything or changing it up, it's just like, we should have been done a while ago. Like, why are we still on this topic?
Right. I was thinking back to when I was thinking about math as you were talking, and when we realized around, I think it was 5th grade, that you hadn't memorized your math facts, right? Like the basic 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4.
I knew 1 times 1 was 1, Mom.
Well, but
yes,
as
I get what you're saying.
but most kids, you're like, I learned to memorize all the way up to 12 times 12, right?
Yeah.
So, 1 times 2, 1 times 3, 1 times 4, all the way up to 12. And then starting with 12 times 1, 12 times 2, 12 times 3, right? All the way up.
Yep.
And when you were in 5th grade, when math was a struggle, we realized that part of the problem why it was difficult for you to do some of the longer multiplication and division was because you needed that foundation of math facts. So when we did that, do you remember why that was so hard? Remember how we used to work on that? Like every night. Yeah, we had flashcards. What else did we do though? We didn't just use flashcards.
Oh, it was the timed tests.
Yeah, and I would make you repeat repeat it back to me. Like if I held up a flashcard that said 6 times 7.
I had to say 6 times 7 equals blank.
Right.
Like I couldn't just say.
Right. And what does 6 times 7 equal?
6 times 7. Oh my gosh, you picked the one. Wait, no, 42.
Good. So I remember what I was doing then was I was trying to figure out if maybe it was a visual challenge that you had or an auditory challenge. So I was using both, right, to try to see which worked. And eventually, we really worked on that for maybe like a month or 6 weeks.
Yes, and as you can clearly tell, given my ability to just repeat that back there, I still remember my multiplication facts up through 12, despite not having worked on them since those first.
Well, yeah, and that was the idea, right? That you would memorize them.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of your favorite things to do? What are some of your interests?
I like to draw. I like to write. I like to write and draw together, combined. Additionally, I like to watch documentaries. I'm a real history person, so I watch a lot of history documentaries. Got that one from my dad.
So talk a little bit about how you like to draw and write at the same time. What do you mean by that?
So I enjoy creative writing, specifically fiction writing. And I enjoy reading it. I enjoy writing it. And part of what I like to do is I like to make story concepts or like characters. I'm a big original character person. If you know, you know. And I will write like basic story outlines, and I'm horrible at actually following through with these, but I'll write story outlines and detailed sheets, and then I'll also like design characters and settings and draw it all out. And I've considered like making a graphic novel or like also just writing a straight up novel. Those are some of the things that like intrigue me and interest me.
So what is it that you like so much about original character development?
I get to make people that are easy to understand.
You always talk about them like they're your children.
They are my children, and yes, that I very much appreciate my characters because I can make them make sense primarily because in the real world, people don't really make a whole lot of sense because there's a whole lot that goes into them. So part of me likes making characters that are super complex, but also like they make sense on a fundamental level. Like their flaws and their strengths are connected in some way and they play off of each other. They aren't contradictory, which can happen for a lot of people in the real world where like their personality traits contradict each other. I know that this is something that I deal with. Like my personality traits are both that I am calm and easy to excite. Like it's difficult.
So, listening to you talk about it, it makes me wonder if you like character development because it gives you an opportunity to maybe work through some of your social anxiety or social struggles.
And in another way, and in another way, it's kind of a way for me to study people, like creating a person, so to speak, from scratch, from the ground up, like creating their background and how their childhood influences who they are in the present and what their character flaws are and their character development and how their experiences shape them over time. That is, to me, the best study in how people work. And of course, you could say that I am making something which is illogical try and be logical, that being people, but that's how I work through it.
So do you like psychology?
Yes, I like psychology and sociology, and I invested a lot of time into both. And there's a really great thing that I heard, but I cannot remember where. I actually think it was like on TikTok or something, which is hilarious. But this person was basically talking about how a lot of times when you're neurodiverse or have a hard time understanding people, you will go to things like to studies like sociology and psychology, academic understandings of the human condition in order to make yourself understand people more. But then you become the social equivalent of overdressed for every situation as opposed to your prior underdressed, because now you are doing things that people don't understand. Like you've gone too far.
Or maybe you're like
direction.
too analytical.
Yes, you're being too analytical, too scientific about something which seems pretty chaotic, which is just socialization.
Well, and maybe it also seems emotional, but you're kind of unemotional about it.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I think I have to preface that with people sometimes when when they ask me for help with something and it may be kind of an emotional situation. I feel like I need to explain that my tendency is to completely detach from the emotional side of it and just try to give like really good advice and help them come up with the best solution, but I may not be the best at showing empathy.
Yeah, definitely. When I'm faced with emotional issues, my first instinct is to, like you, solve the problem. This is a problem that needs to be solved. My first instinct isn't to comfort the person, isn't to offer any emotional support. It's just to solve the problem and get it over with, because I have a hard time empathizing with the emotional struggles of the person. And additionally, when I get bad news or good news, no matter how bad or how good, typically I'm not super expressive about it, especially not in public. Like the most reaction you might get of me is like an "oh, okay," or a "cool, that's great." Like I'm not super expressive about how I feel in certain situations when in public, especially.
Why do you think that is? Do you think you know how you feel? You're just afraid to express it, or are you processing how you feel?
I think it's something entirely different. I know how I feel, and I'm currently in the process of processing it, but I don't outwardly process my emotions. It's more internal for me. So how I tend to deal with them is just like introspecting for a while by myself. And then it's usually pretty easy for me to get over things, which makes it super hard for me to empathize with people who are still experiencing the same emotional issue, like long after it's happened, because I'm used to working through my issues quickly. So I kind of impose that expectation upon other people.
So is that what you mean, like when you say you're doing a big think?
Yes, I do. I do big things, as I call them, where I think big and I introspect by myself, which it's typically not like a pleasant or fun thing to do, but it's something that you need to do in order to like work through your issues. Otherwise, they're just never going to be resolved, and you're just going to build them up inside you, and they're going to bubble to the surface one day.
Yes. Yeah, we'll talk about that more sometime, about exactly how you do that. If it's really just a think, or do you write, or do you draw, or like do you have to dance around? We don't have to do it right now, though, necessarily. So I want to go back in time a little bit, right? So now we know that you have these differences, diagnoses, which I don't like that everything is a diagnosis or an identification. But now that we know more around how you think and how you learn, right? How you experience the world, I feel like things have gotten a lot better for our relationship, but it wasn't always like that.
Oh, no.
So let's talk a little bit about what it was like when you were younger, before we knew some of these things. Or maybe what we should talk about is just like how our relationship changed and what really changed it. Because when you were younger, I feel like we had a lot more challenges, right? We had a lot more
scuffles.
Yeah, scuffles. Right. We did not have a harmonious relationship.
Yes, coexistence was not easy.
Right. Why do you think it was hard back then?
I think it was mainly like a lack of understanding, and also like a lack of communication, and a lack of understanding communication when it did occur.
So talk a little bit more about that. Like, we didn't understand each other, or I didn't understand you, or you didn't understand yourself.
I think that we mainly like didn't understand each other. And for a while there, I didn't understand myself because mental health education wasn't a thing and still really isn't much of a thing. But I just couldn't, there wasn't like a word or something that I could identify with feeling, because I'm not super great at reading emotional situations. Unless I can like put a name to it, then I don't know what I'm feeling. And at that point in time, too, like, I didn't know you could feel, like, two things at the same time. Like, you were either happy or sad. You couldn't be, like, sad and angry or happy and sad at the same time. So it was...
Yeah, so how did you start to discern those feelings?
Mainly, it came in, like, the form of independent research, which is also how I found out a lot of things about myself. YouTube, my Lord and Savior. You sure did do a lot for me back in my early days. Not sure if most of it was good though. But
who are you talking about? I don't understand.
I'm talking about YouTube, Mom.
Oh,
like how I would
YouTube is your Lord and Savior.
Yeah,
I thought you
YouTube.
I thought you said YouTube,
my Lord
and Savior. Like we should go search it on YouTube.
No. Oh my gosh, no. The great thing about the internet is that you can meet a lot of people with a lot of experiences and a lot of words for things. So I learned a lot of words for things. And also, I read the Percy Jackson books. And if you know anything about the Percy Jackson books, if you've read them especially, you'll know that one of the big deals of being a demigod in the Percy Jackson books is that you have both ADHD and dyslexia. And I had never heard those terms before. I was like, wait, what are those? So I looked them up because Google is a wonderful, magical place full of information. And I found that I had heard dyslexia before in passing from you, but I hadn't really like learned what it was. What I was particularly interested in that moment was ADHD. And I looked at it and I looked into it and I realized, wow, that sounds an awful lot like me. And I told you about it in the car on the way to school.
Do you remember how old you were then?
Yes, I was in 5th grade.
Yeah, because, you got diagnosed in 5th grade, though.
I got
so it was
diagnosed
right before
in the end of 5th grade, and
right.
I read the Percy Jackson books in the beginning of 5th grade.
Got it. Yeah, see, I don't really remember that anymore, but isn't that interesting? So the Percy Jackson books were one of those, like, light bulb moments for you when you were reading Percy Jackson.
They sure were. Because, like, that was the first time I had heard, like, that was the first time I had seen things like neurodiversity in media, other than Rain Man years earlier, which I didn't even know what was going on back then. But, yeah, that was, like, the first time I had ever seen, like, not only neurodiversity, but neurodiversity terminology, like, in any form of media was in those books.
They actually talk about ADHD by name in the Percy Jackson books.
Yeah, it's like dyslexia. One of the first things that they do. It's like one of the first things that they do, like especially. And they talk about like how it kind of feeds into being a demigod and all that stuff. And
So are you saying that you're a demigod?
No. No, but that's like how it's
kidding.
introduced. It's introduced. Okay, so Percy Jackson, I'm going to go on a tirade here. Percy Jackson is the main character of the Percy Jackson books. Surprise, surprise, shocker. And he is, at the beginning of the book, a struggling student. He's been kicked out of many schools, and and it's explicitly stated he has ADHD and dyslexia. And he has a lot of problems that way, and things keep happening to him that keep getting him in trouble, but he doesn't know what's going on. And one of the things that the Percy Jackson books do is that they kind of rationalize ADHD and dyslexia as like part of being a demigod, like the reasons why that happens, which isn't particularly like in line with real life, but it's pretty understandable, especially if you know about the origin of the Percy Jackson books, that being the author's own son was the inspiration for Percy Jackson, which is also why they use actual terminology. These were conditions that his son had. And, or has. But that was like the first time, because they went over the symptoms of it, like ADHD, mixed combined type ADHD, like you have a hard time focusing and you're hyperactive and all this stuff. And like in the Percy Jackson books, it's like because you're hardwired to fight monsters. And the reason you have dyslexia is because you're hardwired to read ancient Greek. I can't read Greek. I tried.
So it's cool because it basically but these things make you a demigod in Percy Jackson, which kind of make them positive things, yes?
Yeah, and there's like some discourse around this about whether or not rationalizing it was a good idea. But for me, I know that especially back then when I was younger, it made me feel good. Like these weren't issues. They were something that made me special. But at the same time, Percy Jackson was not a book that glorified being a demigod in any way. Being a demigod was dangerous and tended to get you killed. But it named them was the real thing for me. And then like the rationalization of them as people who are demigods came later, and I was like, oh cool. Percy Jackson being a fantasy book, because that's what it is, but it had used the terminology, which was what sparked the idea in my head and what inspired me to look further into it and tell you in the car on the way to school.
So you told me, and what did I say?
You were like, I don't know, or like you were kind of dodging the issue. This was back in 5th grade when you were just not.
Right. So I was not what?
You were not very supportive or open to the idea of neurodiversity or like any form of mental difference.
Yeah, I think thinking back, I think what I was resistant to was the idea of disorders. Yeah. But specifically, I believed, that a lot of kids had been diagnosed with ADHD, and I was not convinced what ADHD was. I just didn't know a lot about it. I was kind of ignorant about what it was, right? So I was kind of resistant because I thought it was sort of like the diagnosis du jour, right? Yeah. Everybody, all the kids were getting diagnosed with ADHD, and that was a concern to me. I wanted to be skeptical. I think that's really what it was. I wanted to be skeptical about it because it seemed like a very popular diagnosis and a way to medicate kids, right? And I was just very skeptical about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you were definitely skeptical, and you kind of tried to dodge the issue a little bit. And I was like, wow, Mom, great. I feel so loved and supported right now.
Wow.
Yeah, miscommunication and misunderstanding.
Yeah, I think that was probably the root of a lot of our discord, yes?
Yeah, because to me, what I thought from your skepticism was that you were afraid or resistant to the idea that I wasn't normal, or that I wasn't perfect or typical, or like an easy to understand, safe, neurotypical, like normal girl who didn't have any problems, who didn't have any struggles. Like it was all just a phase for my teenage years, and it wasn't a big problem, and I'd get over it. And even after,
you weren't a teenager then, you were 10.
No, I was 12, Mom.
Oh.
No, I was like, no, I don't know how old
I feel like you were 10 or 11.
11-ish. Yeah, I was 11. Something somewhere in the age range.
Well, I want to respond to that actually, right? And I can see how you might think that. And honestly, there may have been a little bit of that because when you were 6, they had identified you as gifted. And even that was like a big blow to me. And I was kind of skeptical about that at first. But because there was an actual assessment and hard numbers and data, it was much easier for me to wrap my head around. When it came to things like ADHD, it seemed like a very subjective form of evaluation, right? Like, because they ask you, they ask me a bunch of questions. They do all these questionnaires. They ask you a bunch of questions, but it isn't, to me, I had a hard time with it, I think, because it wasn't quite as formal and data, oriented of an evaluation as, say, taking the WISC 4 or later on WISC 5 was. But it wasn't, I really don't believe it's that I wanted you to be perfect. It's that I wanted to protect you from a label that I thought might be hurtful or might hold you back or, lots of things, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot to navigate as a parent.
And also, like, part of where, like, the phase ideology in me came, like, that you thought it was all just a phase, came from, even after I got my diagnosis, you told me, people who have ADHD, and I'm quoting here, grow out of it. Like, when they get older, it goes away. And I was like, well, what if it doesn't go away? Like, that was my direct response to that, because it felt like you were diminishing my issues as a phase, and me being a, like, tween girl on the internet back then thought that your parents thought that everything was just a phase. So I just kind of, like, immediately interpreted that as, oh, you are diminishing my lived experience.
Yeah. And I understand that in retrospect, right? I don't remember many of these conversations like you do. In fairness, that's one of my neurodiversities is I don't hold on to all those details very well. I just remember broad strokes, but it makes sense, right? There's a lot of misinformation out there that I'm sure I was influenced by. And it seems kind of crazy to me now to think that I might have said things like that and might have believed things like that because I've come a long way since then. That was almost 5-6 years ago now. So that feels like a lifetime away in terms of my learning and what I've grown to understand about things like ADHD. But I'll also say the same thing would have been true about autism spectrum disorder back then.
Oh, yes.
That wasn't even on our radar.
That would have been worse, I think. I think that because autism, when people think of autism, they think of Rain Man. They think of this savant. I think that if I had even, like, mentioned it to you, your first instinct would have been, no way. No way. And especially because people tend to think of autism as this, like, horrible disease that infects your mind and makes you dysfunctional in everyday life. Like, no.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I want to go back for a minute and kind of button up something about the ADHD diagnosis. So what happened with that was, like I said, I don't totally remember these conversations, but you mentioned it to me in early 5th grade. And then shortly thereafter, you started to really have some struggles in school, particularly with math. And I also started really pushing you to at least let me take, like, an assessment. Right. And I also could rationalize, because you were going to be moving from elementary to middle school, that it was probably time to, I think we needed to have a new WISC assessment, because as we looked at middle schools, I thought we might, in addition to public schools, like the public school you were in, I thought we might also look at private schools. And we would need to have those WISC assessment results, right, for that. So I went back to the original psychologist who had identified you gifted in the first place, right? Went back to him. It had been like 4 years later, and explained to him, how things were going with you, and that I wanted to have an updated WISC, and that I also thought we should do more of a full neuropsychological evaluation, right?
Yep, and I distinctly remember your response afterwards. Like, I remember it word for word, and I remember just how awful it made me feel.
So like I said at the beginning of the episode, Maddie's and my relationship hasn't always been the way it is today. And as I said also at the beginning of the episode, she would be more than happy to point out some of the missteps that I've made. I'm really okay with that, though. I'm more than okay with it. I'm not proud that I have, done some things that in retrospect I can hardly believe that I did or that I handled things the way I did. But I think it's important that we learn to forgive ourselves as parents. There is no manual, there is no guidebook. We're going to get thrown things that we're not always going to deal with as well as we wish we would have. And even more importantly, I think it's really critical that Maddie be able to share about these things openly and that she and I can talk about them and even today have a sense of humor about them. This has been a big part of how we've healed our relationship and built the relationship that we have today. So without further ado, you can listen to episode 4 whenever you're ready to hear what happened next. Thanks for tuning in to the Exceptional Girls podcast. If you liked today's episode, it would mean the world to me if you'd subscribe, leave a rating and review, and recommend it to just one other person who you think would benefit from listening. Even a small act of support helps the podcast reach more people, which in turn helps increase awareness and understanding of exceptionality in girls. And if you have suggestions for future episodes, please share them. You can connect with me, your host, Julie Withrow, through our website at exceptionalgirlspodcast.com/contact. And that's a wrap. Ciao for now.